Hello! Today is the 28th of February 2022, somehow, and that means it's 10 years to the day since SSX launched on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, in North America at least. Us Europeans had to wait until March 2nd for, reasons, I suppose. SSX is a 2012 snowboarding game created by EA Sports, an attempt to reboot the SSX franchise of games dating back to the early 2000s, which included one of my favourite games literally of all time, SSX Tricky. The SSX franchise was well known for its over-the-top, slightly cartoony style of snowboarding fun. Whilst the snowboarding itself was vaguely, most of the time, within the realms of sense, when it came to jumps and tricks, yeah, that all went out of the window. You just need to take a look at this filth from 2001's SSX Tricky to get the idea. It was wild. And this was just the best I could do, and I'm terrible at it. Sadly, after the release of SSX on Tour in 2005, the franchise went on a little bit of a hiatus, its only subsequent outing in the noughties coming in the form of SSX Blur on Nintendo Wii. Whilst this game actually went down pretty well, I've never played it, but apparently it's good, it never really felt like a proper entry in the series, and that's all we saw of SSX. That is, until 2012, when the series went through a sort of reboot in the form of SSX, which is the reason you're here, presumably. First announced in 2010, SSX was seen as a brand new beginning for the classic franchise, bringing back that crazy sense of fun whilst also nudging the series into a slightly more realistic world, ditching the made-up courses and arenas from the previous games and moving to real-world mountains including the Alps and the Rockies. The game also aimed to bring more of a story-driven narrative along with it, rather than the kind of series of events style that the older SSX games employed. In this case, you play as Zoe, Mac and Tame, who have created Team SSX with the goal of conquering 9 of the world's most deadly mountainous descents, largely to build a social media following and cash in as far as I can tell. Maybe I should do that rather than make retro game videos. There's an idea. Anyway, Griff, who's a bit of a knob and a former SSX member, has the same idea and wants to complete the deadly descents before you do. So the general concept of the game is that you race to complete the descents as fast as you can and before he does. It's fairly standard, but effective fare for a sports game storyline. The question is though, how well was all of this implemented? Well, as it turns out, much like rocking a rhyme that's right on time, rebooting a beloved franchise on new platforms after 7 years of pent-up demand is tricky. But luckily, EA's developers mostly rose to the challenge. Generally speaking, the reboot of the SSX franchise was welcomed with open arms by the gaming community. With Metacritic scores of 81 on PlayStation 3 and 82 on Xbox 360, it didn't exactly set the world alight, but it did go down pretty damn well. Praised for its great new control scheme and its ability to mostly recapture the stupid fun of SSX past, IGN went as far as deeming it the game the generation was missing, whilst T3 described it as instantly accessible but eternally challenging and vibrant. For the most part, there are only really 2 criticisms levelled at the then new SSX game. 1, the multiplayer kinda sucked, and 2, with the swerve towards realism, it didn't really feel like an SSX game anymore. Oh, and as I found out while playing it, it can be bloody irritating. Difficult. On the multiplayer point, yeah, that's fair. There are only really 2 modes online, one where you could race against ghosts and set best times on certain courses, and another where you could, well, basically do the same, as far as I can tell. The only real difference there was that I think other players would sort of be on the course with you at the same time, and there's timed challenge events for you to throw down a high score on, so it's not always the same courses or the same challenge. It varies up a little bit, but you know, it's pretty much the same. Anyway, it was okay, and some other token bits and pieces got added in a patch later on, but generally it feels as though EA maybe could have done a little bit more to give the game some more multiplayer longevity. As for not feeling like an SSX game, at the time I 100% agreed with that. In fact, I distinctly remember the palpable excitement of going into GameStation to get my copy, which was quickly replaced with a "what the hell is this" mood when I loaded it up an hour or 2 later. But looking back at the game in isolation as an alleged grown-up, and away from the old SSX titles, I have to say EA Sports did do a very good job here. It was sort of like a reluctant coming of age for the series. Its crazy teenage tendencies were still there, but more toned down and refined, only coming out on special occasions. The big question now though is it worth playing today? And the short answer to that, in my opinion at least, is yeah, go for it. You've really not got much to lose. Having played it again after all this time, I really did enjoy it, and whilst it still doesn't live up to my 20-year-old memories of, 20 years, 20 Where does the time go? Anyway, where was I? And whilst it still doesn't live up to my 20-year-old memories of SSX Tricky, there is still a lot of fun to be had here. Visually, it's still fine. It's not jaw-dropping, obviously, because it's a decade old, but fine. The control scheme is pretty great, there's a lot of single-player content, and in general, it's just very accessible fun. Until it gets difficult anyway, but maybe I'm just terrible at it. Okay, fine, I'm definitely terrible at it. Looking at this, it's also made me realise that there really haven't been that many more snowboarding games come out since SSX, which is a real shame because it's genuinely a great game genre. The only big budget one that I can really think of since this is Ubisoft's Steep, and whilst that's a solid game, it's not really a pure snowboarding experience because there's unavoidable skiing and paragliding and all of that stuff in there. It came out during Ubisoft's annoying more is more phase, which also ruined the crew too, but that's a story for a different day. Somehow or another, Steep also came out 6 years ago now, so it's not even that much newer. Then on top of that, there's a game called Snow, which I think was free, but now isn't, but the reviews seem to suggest that you'd overpaid for it even if you did get it for nothing. Then there's Mcmorris Infinite Air. That one focused heavily on physics and simulation, which didn't really seem to make it quite as fun as some of the other games that have come out. I guess what I'm saying is that if you fancy a snowboarding game, SSX is a really damn good option. It mostly filled that over-the-top snowboarding fun niche which captured so many people, myself included, back in the early 2000s, and whilst it maybe doesn't do it quite as well as its predecessors did, it's still a game that's well worth playing. But hey, if you happen to have a PS3 or Xbox 360 knocking about, then give SSX a go. You can easily pick it up for a few pounds on eBay, or perhaps from rudely named second-hand shops here in the UK. If you're into snowboarding, or maybe just racing games in general, I don't think you can go too far wrong. So, EA, it's been 10 years, how about another reboot? Or even just a remaster of the earlier games with SSX's controls? My wallet is ready. Right, well, I guess that's the end of the video. I don't know how to end this, so, okay, thanks, bye, like, comment, subscribe, and all that stuff. See ya!